All right, Rabbi, say good morning, good tavach. Schos Baruch Hashem to begin another week together. Beginning by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors. First, our Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei Hey, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson family of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shirman Droshos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tavos for all of Am Yisrael. And our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, the families who dedicated all the Shirman Droshos this month, Stephen Tarizin, in honor of the birth of their granddaughter, Devorah Eliana Zin, and commission of the yard site of Dr. Zin's father, Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Devracha. Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, and Schusser for Shlema for Rabin's cousin serving in the IDF, Yamin Chaim Pesach Ben Moshe Chana, creation of the yard site of Rabin's mother, Pasamira Bas Chaim. Dr. Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Dr. Gevant's parents, Yaakov Meir ben Moshe Leib and Sheena Bas Abba, and Dr. Bezad and Yamina South of Los Angeles, in the merit of a Refuah Shalema for Esther Bracha Bas Chaya Cohen. And of course, we all, Bas Chaya, excuse me, and then of course we also dedicate our learning, follow the news over Motzei Shabbos about the murder of Rabbi Tzvi Kogan, the Chabad Shaliach in the United Arab Emirates. Traumatic and terrible Churban. Just, it's amazing to see just the lengths that our enemies go to. Who could imagine like the amount of resources and time that it took for our enemies to coordinate this? And when you're filled with such animosity and such hatred and such vitriol. I mean, just like an innocent young man, just in some, whatever, in the UAE, helping Jews wherever they may be, like Chabad always does. And just overwhelming. Chodesh Baruch Hu Shem Hashem provided his neshama with an aliyah and his family a nechama. And in the schos of all of our Torah, Meretz Hashem, all of the neshama should have an aliyah, the families in nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Chodesh Baruch Hu Shem Hashem, return our hostages. B'shalom and Bekarav, and our holy soldiers should be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yedehem. Because with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A really great daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Nun Beis 152, and we are starting at the top on Kuf Nun Beis. So the Gemara says as follows: always good to start the week, together with the daf Yomi cycle. But we'll see Meretz Hashem where things take us over the course of the week. So says the Gemara. Some really interesting. I will say that I think we're all in agreement. Whoever knew there was so much to talk about Shchiv Mirah. Right? For a guy who's on his final moments in life, there's certainly a lot of Torah going on over here. So the Gemara says this house, Itmar, Shchimira Shekasvu Bo Kinyan. Suppose it's an interesting case over here. So you have a Shchimira. Now remember again, one of the terms that we've seen used a number of different times is the concept of a daitiki. Daitiki is a deathbed will. So as much as a Shchimira, remember again, doesn't need to use any written instruments, right? Because the Shchimira doesn't have to use any type of kinyan. But however, it would not be uncommon for a Shchimira to go ahead and record his final request, his Shchimira gift, in a document. That's called a daitiki. We've also seen, by the way, we'll talk about this. Well, let's stick to this. So now, interesting case over here. Matna Shchimira Shekasa Bakinyan. Let's say you have a document. So you have what we call this daitiki. You have this daitiki, and inside of the document there is a kinyan written into it. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's Rashbam Shekasav Balkinyan. It's right in the middle of the thin lines. Shekasav Balkinyan. V'adinim ein kasav kinyan b'soch hashtar, o afilu ein kan hashtar klal, el shchimra shehizkir tzava shchimra ki shechala kol nechasav, v'gam hikna osam b'kinyan sudar l'mekabel matana. Aval orcha demilsa nakit derech shekasav. I suppose the case over here is as follows. So the case over here is, so we'll call him Shchimira. Shchimira is gifting something to Ruvain. And in the document it says, I Shchimira gifted something to Ruvain, and we did a kinyan sudar. So the document records that a kinyan was performed. Now why is this intriguing? Because a Shchimira doesn't need a kinyan. Right, so now he has a document, a deathbed will, which is fine. Again, by the way, Shchimira doesn't even need that, right? But he's got a deathbed will, and in the deathbed will it says that a kinyan was done. So now you understand what's going to be the shaila over here. The shaila is, so what is this? What is this? Now again, the transaction could work, but is this a Shchimira transaction? Is this a regular gift? And again, it's going to have major ramifications. Let's see. So Bei Rav Mishmei Rav Amri Arkavei Cherechshi. So again, we're going to explain all of this in just a little bit. But Beirav, so essentially Beirav, the yeshiva of Rav, in the name of Rav, said Arkavei Cherechshi, which literally means this transaction rides on two horses. which again, before even knowing what that means is, we clearly know what it means is, this transaction has like a dual identity, which we'll explain in just a moment. Shmuel says, Lo yidana my adun ba. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to categorize it. So let's analyze both of these opinions. So Bei Rav Mishmei de Rav Amar Arkevei Atrei Richshi. So in the name of Rav, they said that the transaction rides on two horses, because on one hand, Hari Kimatnas Bari and Hari Kimatnas Shchimira. In certain respects, this is like a healthy person's gift. And in other respects, it's like a shchimira. How so? Harihi kimatnas bari. So on one hand, it's like a matnas bari. Now, why is it like a matnas bari? Shim amad eno chozer. Supposed to remember. Let's take a step back over here. The way a matnas shchimira works is how? It is clear. Essentially, matnas shchimira is a gift that is that in halacha is viewed as being done with the tanai. What's the tanai? What's the condition? What's the condition? If I die, the gift is good. And if I don't die, I'm kind of going to need my stuff back, right? In other words, now remember again, just to be clear, we said this last week, but just to clarify it again, the shchimira is not actually giving anything away now, right? Remember again, a matnas shchimira is a gift that is being made now while he's a shchimira, but nothing is actually being given away until after his death. So when we speak about this idea that he takes back chozer just means transactionally nothing is given away. But lamaisa, again, it's not like he has to go and claw back any property. So again, every matnas shchimira is essentially done als t'nai on a condition that I die, but if I recover, I'm not giving you anything. So on one hand, Bei Rav in the name Yeshiva Rav, in the name of Rav, said that it rides on two horses. On one hand, it's like a matnas shchimira, and it's like a matnas bari. So it's like a matnas bari in that what? In this case, the shchimira recovers. Sorry. No, it's good, I got it, thank you. On one hand, if the shchimira recovers, then halacha l'maisa, it's chozer. The gift comes back. So I'm sorry, just said it the wrong way. So on one hand, it's like a healthy person's gift, in that what? In that halacha l'maisa, if he recovers, the gift still stands. So we'll say, so understand what's happening over here. So remember, when a healthy person gives a gift, that is an irrevocable gift. So the idea over here is, so Bei Rav is saying like this, or Rav is saying like this, because there is a kinyan employed over here, and a kinyan is not necessary in a matnas shchimira, in certain respects, the kinyan, right, the presence of the kinyan categorizes it as a matnas bari, a healthy person's gift. Now, what's the status of a healthy person's gift? If I give property, right, and a regular person's gift, whether it dies or doesn't die, doesn't make a difference. The gift stands. So in certain respects, the presence of the kinyan makes it into a healthy person's gift, and therefore even if shchimira recovers, still the gift will stand. On the other hand, Hari Kimatnas Shchimira, Shem Amar Hava Asa Leploni, Hava Asa Leploni. On the other hand, interestingly enough, it has the status of a Shchimira gift. How? Because, let's say again, what he was doing is, let's say he was assigning a loan. Right? Let's say in this particular case over here, what Shchimira was gifting to Ruvain was a loan. They're both saying, I remember again, we spoke about this before, if you have a milva, if you have a loan, how do you assign a loan to someone else? Stam case, I want to go ahead, Ruvain owes me money, I want to assign the debt to Shimon, so Shimon can collect it, I'm giving him the debt. How do you do that? How do you do it? Right, so excellent. Right, so if it's a written debt, in other words, if it's a milva al shtar, then you give over the document. Whoever has the document has the power of collection. What happens if it's a milva al peh, a verbal loan? How do you do that? Excellent. Maimin shlashtan. We had this last week. Maimin shlashtan. Maimin shlashtan is an interesting halacha where if you have the lender, the borrower, and now the person who I'm the lender, the person who I'm giving it over to, and we're all together, we could transfer it like that. Interesting halacha, Maimin shlashtan. The only other person who has the ability to go ahead and assign a debt without Maimin shlashtan and without the shtar is a shchivmira. So it's in this respect, so Rav says that this transaction will be like a matna shchivmira, in that technically speaking, if the item being gifted is alone, he could gift it without a star, and he could gift it ultimately again even without maimin shloshtan. So we'll say, so this is the position of Rav. So again, let's just reframe the case, because that's actually really interesting cases. So again, shchivmira is giving a gift to Ruvain. But what he did, interestingly enough, is he has a daitiki, deathbed will, which is fine, no problem. That doesn't stare, that doesn't in any way undermine the matna shchimira. But in it, it says that he performed the kinyan. He performed the kinyan. According to Rashbam, it says that he performed the kinyan with Ruvain. Although we'll see, it doesn't really have to be with Ruvain. It could also be to the witnesses on the star as well. But he did it with Ruvain. Okay, that's what Rashbam says. So the shaila now is, what does the presence of the kinyan do to the matnas shchivmira? So first opinion, Rav, what it does is this transaction has a dual identity. Certain respects it's like a matnas shchivmira, certain respects it's like a matnas bari. Matnas shchivmira, in that you could even assign a debt, even without maimin shlashtan, or without a shtar, and it's like a matnas bari, like a healthy person's gift, because if the shchivmira recovers, the gift still stands. What makes it into a what is it that makes it into a quasi matnas bari? That is the presence of the unnecessary kinyan. Okay, so that's Rav. Beautiful, beautiful. Shmuel says, Shmuel Amar, lo yedana my adin bey. So Shmuel says, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this. Why? Because on one hand, Shema lo gamar lahaknoso el b'shtar. Tzibah say, here's the interesting part about this transaction. There's a kinyan and there's a shtar. The kinyan and the shtar attests to the fact that a kinyan was made. So maybe shchivmira has in mind to go ahead and halacha l'maisa only be makne'et with the shtar. Maybe that's, thank you. Maybe that's what he's trying to do. Whereas maybe the shtar is the mechanism of conveyance. Here's the problem. Both say, now again, on one hand, fine, you want to make the shtar the mechanism of conveyance, that's fine. What's the problem in this case? The ein shtar la'achar misa. Ultimately, again, you can't, the shtar is not a mechanism after the both say. Remember again, just to be clear, there is only one type of posthumous property conveyance, and that is called Yerusha, inheritance, right? You can't give a gift posthumously. You can't. There's no mechanism for that. The only other thing besides Yerusha that works posthumously is matna shchimira, which is, by the way, coming full circle. So it's so exciting, coming full circle. That even though shchimira is a matana, but it's a matana that's a derivative of Yerusha, because anything that's going to work, and that's why again we saw. Remember again we had the machlokes last week about whether or not the concept of matna shchimira is a doraisa or a derabanan. According to the opinions that said it was a doraisa, which psukim were they learning it from? They were learning it from Yerusha. So again, Shalom was the one who asked. He says, so what's the connection between Yerusha, which is Yerusha, inheritance, and Shchimira, which is Matana? Because again, in order for Matana to work posthumously, it has to somehow derive from Yerusha. So therefore, again, you have Shmuel coming along and saying, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with this transaction. Because since you have a shtar and you have a kinyan in the shtar, maybe Shchimira only wants this to be chal through the shtar after he dies, and you can't go ahead and give a shtar after the death of the conveyor. So therefore Shmuel doesn't know what to do with the transaction. Okay, so we'll say these are machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Virami adirav with the Shmuel. So we'll say now the Gemara brings up a contradiction between the position of Rav and the position of Shmuel. The Gemara says the Shalach Rabin Mishmeid Rabbi Avo. So Rabin sent the name of Rabbi Avo the following idea: Have yadi no sheshalach Rabbi Lazar legola mishum Rabbeinu. Rabbi Lozer sent out to the diaspora communities in the name of Rabbi Huda Hanasi. And what did he go ahead and send out? He said as follows: Shchimina sha'amar kisvu utinu mani leploni umeis. So this is an interesting case. Shchimina says this to witnesses: I want you to write a document and give amana, give $1,000 to Ruvain, and then he dies. Now he dies before the document was written. Dies before the document is written. So what do we do in this case? So the Gemara says, Ein kosvin minosnin. We can't execute this gift. Why not? The Gemara says, Shema lo gamar lahaknoso el b'shtar, because his Shchimira said, Kisvu utenu. Since Shchimira said, write the document and convey. Maybe the Shchimira only wants the conveyance through the shtar, and you can't do a shtar after the death of the conveyor. Ve'ein shtar la'achar misa. So I will say, so that's the halacha. Well, that's the halacha ultimately, again, as espoused by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Vam Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and Rabbi Yehuda said name Shmuel, Hilchasa Kosin V'Nosnin. And I will say ultimately again, Rabbi Yehuda said name Shmuel. The halacha is that we write it, and we do write it. We do write it. So the Gemara says as follows. See, here's the issue. So we'll say here again. The Rabbeinu actually is Rav. Sorry. So the Gemara says here you see kasha the Rav, kasha the Shmuel. So we'll say both Rav and Shmuel are contradicting their previously espoused opinions. To which the Gemara says no. The Rav lo kasha. Had kanumine, had lo kanumine. So one could be talking about a case where ultimately again a shchivmera did a kinyan with the Eidim, and one is talking about where he didn't do a kinyan with the Eidim. So the Shmuel lo kasha b'miyafa eskocho, and Shmuel is also not a contradiction. Why? Because we both say sometimes the only reason why the shchivmera would do the kinyan, or the shtar for that matter, is to go ahead and bolster the entitlement or the claim of the intended recipient. So this last piece is incredibly important. Let's just spend a moment on this. Take a look at the last Rashbam. B'miafes kofo kilakaman v'kanina minei Mosef al matanasa da yitor liapos kocho v'achanayim b'tzabas shamakisu tenu pershi yichtavu b'shtar to yipor. So let's listen to this. Okay, let's talk about this just for a moment. This is very exciting. Here's what we know, right? Let's start with what we know. So the Gemara says, no problem, that'll take about 10 seconds to go through what we know, right? Let's go with what we know, right? We know that a shchivmera has a unique ability to convey property. That's what we know. And he does not need any formal kinyan. What we also know is, the moment he starts introducing other pieces, it makes things complicated. Only because we don't know how to categorize the transactions. So that's what's happening over here. So all Shchimra needs to say, is I give my property to Ruvain. Done. It's kiksuvin uchimsurun damu. That's it. Obviously, you need someone to witness it, right? Because the Shechina says something and no one's there to witness it. Does it? Right? Did it happen? Right? Well, in other words, it doesn't have any halachic. It doesn't have any halachic teeth to it. So I don't have to witness it. But that's it. What's complicating in our cases over here is Shechina is introducing kinyanim. So which just leads us to try to understand what are you trying to do. What are you trying to do? So essentially, what we're going to see is there's two different ways to view a kinyan / shtar, which is sometimes what the Shimra is saying is, I want this to be categorized as a formal transaction. Not as a matnas shchimira, but I'm making this on my deathbed, but I want this to be categorized as a formal transaction. And sometimes the point of the kinyan / shtar is what we call miyafa es kocho. It just is to bolster the claim of the recipient. That the Shechina understands that although I Shechina have the ability to convey something just verbally, I want the recipient to have an ironclad hold on it. So how do I do that? A shtar, a kinyan, it's not necessary. It's not necessary, but it just bolsters his claim. So we'll say, so now the next sugi is going to talk about, so how do we know which is which? How do we know when a kinyan / shtar is meant to be the mechanism of conveyance, in which case this transaction could leave the purview of matnas shchimira and just become matnas bari, versus how do we know when kinyan / shtar is there to bolster the claim of the recipient? Okay, so that's our next sugi. Here we go. Yosef Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak achori di Rava, the Yosef Rava kamed Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting behind Rava, and Rava was sitting in front of Rav Nachman. So we'll say, so two different. There's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak and Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is sitting behind Rava, and Rava is sitting in front of Rav Nachman. Okay, Kabay Minei. And Rava asked the following kasha from Rav Nachman. Mi Amar Shmuel, Shema lo gamar lachnosa el b'shtar ve'ein shtar la'achamisa. Did Shmuel really say that in this case, where there's a kinyan written in the shtar, in the daitiki, that perhaps the shchimira only had in mind to convey the gift through a shtar, and the problem with that is that there is no shtar after death. Listen to this: if a shchimira went ahead and wrote all of his property to someone else, he gifted his property to Ruvain. Even though the Eidim did a kinyan. Now look at this case. Shchimira says, he writes in a document, I convey all of my property to Ruvain. he does a kinyan sudar. Remember what a kinyan sudar is, right? You give the right, like the chasana, right? You go and you give the handkerchief, or you give the pen, you give the kli, and ultimately, again, the edim lift it up, or it could be the reverse also. But the point is, he does a kinyan sudar with the edim. The edim are doing the kinyan on behalf of Ruvain, the intended recipient. So now Shchiv Mira did the kinyan with the edim on behalf of Ruvain, the intended recipient. Afal pi shekana miyado amad. If Shchiv Mira recovers, choser. Ooh, he can renege on the gift. He can renege on the gift. Now, both say, even before we go on, what does that show you? What does that show you? That even though there is a kinyan happening over here, right? Even though there's a kinyan happening over here, it is clear that this is still categorized as a matna shchiv mira. And therefore, again, it was done al t'nai, and therefore, if he recovers, ultimately the gift reverts. Why? Amad beis biyadua shelo haya kinyan ela machmas hamisa. Because I got it. He's doing a kinyan, but let's contextualize this. The guy's a shchiv mira. The guy's a shchimira. So the shchimira, and again, we'll say, remember again, there are other pieces that also categorize. We saw yesterday is about whether or not a shchimira has to be everything partially. But the Gemara says even with the kinyan, this is categorized as a matna shchimira. Biyadua shalohaya kinyan ela machmas amisa. Take a look at the Rashbam. Biyadua shalohaya kinyan ela machmas amisa. Hilcha chozerbo ha'imeis kana mekabel matana v'lo amrinan shemelo gamerlak nosa ela b'shtar. They shall achamisa. The kasha the Shmuel the amar lo yedana my adon baby matna shchimira sheyesh ba kinyan dahainu hach v'acha amar kana achamisa. Now, boss, here's what's interesting. Now, for our purposes, just understand what's happening over here, right? So Rav is right. Rava, sorry. Rava is asking this kasha to Rav Nachman, right? And Rava says like this. Now, remember, Shmuel previously had said that when you have a kinyan in a shtar, Shmuel said, I don't know how to categorize that transaction. Is it matnas shchimra? Is it matnas bari? So Rav says to Rav Nachman, is that true? But what about the fact that there's another statement of Rabbi Yehuda named Shmuel? And Rabbi Yehuda said named Shmuel that if a shchimra goes ahead and makes a gift, and he records it in a document, kasu kol nechasav al ploni, and he does a kinyan with the edim, Shmuel says it's still called a matnas shchimra because it's clear. It's clear that the intention ultimately is to go ahead and halacha l'maisa make it a deathbed gift, and therefore if shchimra recovers, the gift is void. Here we see that Shmuel says that even a matna shchimira with the kinyan written inside of it is still considered to be a matna shchimira. So Shmuel is contradicting himself. So the Gemara says, "Va'achli le biyadei v'ishtik." Rav Nachman waved me off with his hand, and I was silent. So remember again, Rav is asking to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman waved his hand, and Rav was silent. Okay, good. Sigmar says, Ki kam, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rava. So listen to this. So now Rav Nachman left. Right, the Rebbe left. So what happened? After the Rebbe left, right, he waved his hand, he shut down this dialogue. So after he got up, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, now remember again, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was sitting behind Rava, right? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was behind Rava. Rava was in front of Rav Nachman. Rava asked this kasha to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman gave him the hand, right, waved him off and left. After Rav Nachman left, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak turns to Rava and says, hey, what was that? Right? What was that? My achvilach, what was happening over there? Amrlei b'miafes kocho. So ultimately, again, so apparently Rava, however Rava understood, but Rava understood what Rav Nachman was saying, that this is a different kind of case. What's this case over here? This is a case of where it was clear that the kinyan was not meant to affect the transaction, but rather the kinyan was meant to solidify the recipient's hold on the property. So also remember again, let's pause here for just a second, let's go back for just a moment before. We just said before that halacha l'maisa, when there is a kinyan involved in a matna shchimira, there are two different ways to view the kinyan. The kinyan could be what we'll call a mechanism for the actual conveyance, a transactional mechanism, or the kinyan can be just a way to solidify and bolster the hold of the recipient. In other words, transactionally, everything is being done through a matna shchimira. I don't need the kinyan. The kinyan is just there as an extra added layer to bolster the hold. that the recipient has on this property. So apparently when Rav Nachman waved off Rava, he was saying, you're getting the case wrong. This is a case of where the kinyan was not used for its transactional impact, but rather again was just used to bolster the hold of the recipient. And therefore in that case, interestingly enough, everyone agrees that what? Everyone agrees that it's a matna shchimira. So Shabbos says, this is very interesting. So now we're narrowing this down a little bit. So apparently in a case where there is a kinyan, but it is clear that the kinyan is not being used for transactional purposes. Rather, it is just being used to bolster the claim or to bolster the hold, right? To bolster the, what's the word I'm looking for? Not claim, but there's to solidify the ownership, to solidify the ownership of the recipient, not for transactional purposes. Then Allah L'maaseh, everyone agrees that the transaction still remains a matna shchimira. I suppose what's the $1 million question? What's the $1 million question? How do you know which is which? All right, excellent question. So the Gemara says, Hechidami yafes koko. So how do you know? Like just, because remember again, it kind of sounds like the words are always the same, right? The transactions. So how do you know, for example, when a kinyan sudar is being used to affect the transaction versus when a kinyan sudar is being used to solidify the ownership of the recipient? Here we go, Amrav Chisda. We'll say, when you find the following written in the document. So in other words, remember again, we'll say all of these cases, they have a shtar also. Right? So when you find the following written in the document, the kanina minei, mosif al matanasa da. So when you find that verbiage, what that phrase means is, we, the Edim, have done a kinyan sudar, with the shchibira, the kanina minei, so we did a kinyan with him, mosif al matanasa da. Above and beyond this matana. So what does that show? What does that highlight? Above and beyond this matana, what does that highlight? So that highlights the idea that the matana is valid by itself, right? The matana is already good to go. The matana is fine. And we also did something additional in addition to this matana, right? We also did a kinyan sudar. So when you have that type of lashon, ultimately in the transaction, that is clear that the kinyan is not being made for transactional purposes because again the matana is already done, but it's v'kanina minei mosif. We also did an additional kinyan with him, additionally above and beyond the basic transaction of the matana itself. Incredible. All right, so we'll say, so now that is the way the Gemara is kind of ending off in this particular sugya over here. That halacha l'maisa, if there is a kinyan written into a matna shchimira, so then halacha l'maisa, if the kinyan is being used to affect the transaction, that's when we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. But if the kinyan is being used just to solidify and bolster the claim of ownership of the recipient, then halacha l'maisa, everyone agrees it's still considered to be a matna shchimira that does not impact the transaction. So I'll just read to the Rambam. The Rambam says as follows. So this is in Hilchos Zechia Umatana, Parak Ches, Halachos Yud and Yud Aleph. Here it is. Matnas shchimira shekasa bakinyan. This is our case. So you have matana v'shchimira that has a kinyan written into it. Now, what does it mean has a kinyan written into it? So again, that means that in the shtar, because remember again, in the shtar it says shchimira is conveying property over to Ruvain, and in the shtar it says that we did a kinyan sudar. That's what it means. In the document it says we did this kinyan. So bein shaisa b'mikzas nechasa bein shaisa b'chol nechasa. We're leaving that on the side. Chosh shinla shema lo gamar laknosa ela b'shtar. V'hoil umatana zu lutzikana el la'achar misa vein shtar la'achar misa v'harei hamatana b'teila. So it says, so the Rambam paskins that in general, if you have a kinyan written in to the document of a matna shchimira, so you have a kinyan written into a daitiki. So again, remember, the document says, shchimira conveyed his property to Ruvain, utilizing and it says, and right, shchimira transfers his property over to Ruvain, and we did a kinyan sudar, and it says that in the document, the gift is batal. The gift is batal. Now the reason the gift is batal is why? Because we don't know what's happening over here. Is this a matna shchimira? Is matna shchimira? Or does the shchimira only want the shtar to affect the kinyan, the matana, after his death? And ein shtar la'achar misa. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if shchimira writes a kinyan into the shtar, invalidates the gift. However, the Rambam says, "V'imkana mimenu k'dei liyapos koach hamakabel, kigon shekasav v'kanina mimenu mosef al-matana zu harehi kayemes." But here, then the Rambam accepts this qualification. But if it's clear that the only role of the kinyan was to bolster and solidify the ownership of the recipient, then it's a matna shchimra, and the kinyan does not in any way shter or undermine the transaction. How would you know that? For example, in a document it is written, "V'kaninu mimenu mosif al matanazu." Use that lashon. And we also did a kinyan. In addition to this matana, we also did a kinyan. What does that show? That the matana is a matana by itself, and the kinyan is something additional to bolster ownership. In type of situation like that, the matana ultimately will still stand. Incredible. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, let's go back there. So Pshita, we'll say we are on Kuflan Beis 150, 2b, 2, 4, 6 lines down from the top. So Pshita, Kasav Lazeh, Kasav Lazeh. So the Gemara says, listen to this case. So let's say, again, Shchimira goes ahead and Kasav Lazeh and Kasav Lazeh, which means, the Rashbam says, Shchimira Shakasav Kol Nechasav L'Ruven, Mata Shchimira. So Loshna Ba'Peh, Loshna B'Ksav, Levar Matana. So the Chasav Kasav Al Nasal Shimin. So what says, again, case number 1 is Shchimira writes all of his property to Ruvain. Again, whether, it doesn't matter, by the way, whether or not there's a shtar or this is verbal, makes no difference. He conveys all of his property to Ruvain. Then what happens? That's on Sunday. Then Ruvain doesn't come to visit him that day. He says, you know what, forget this. Right? Shimon shows up Monday morning and says, Shimon, I'm giving you all of my property. Giving you all my property. So I'll say, what's the halacha? That works. Right? That works. Hainu, dichi asur Rav Dimi amar daitiki mivateles daitiki. So that's Rav Dimi. Also, we've seen this all before. Remember, this is why the mechanics are important. Because nothing is actually being transferred until when? The death of the Shchimira has the ability to change his mind as many times as he wants. So again, Sunday he decides he's giving everything to Ruvain. Okay, and then he decides Monday he's giving it to Shimon, and then Tuesday he's giving it to Levi. Whether he wrote them documents, didn't write them documents, it doesn't make a difference. He has the ability to change his mind as many times as he wants. So there's such a tremendous Musar Haskell in this, that what we see from here is like the Shchimira, who's, literally, again, the Shchimira will say means he's on the last leg of his journey in life. And yet, what do you see? He has the koach to change his mind as many times as he wants. So often in life, we become entrenched in certain ideas and certain outlooks and certain isms and certain ideologies that we know are flawed. We know that they're flawed. But we become so embedded and so entrenched in them that we feel that we can't change it. I can't navigate out. And the Gemara says, there's nothing further from the truth. If someone on his deathbed could change his mind an unlimited number of times, then Allah Chaskama Vakama, we who Baruch Hashem are alive and kicking, Allah Chaskama Vakama have the ability to change our mind on certain things as well, right? All of us have these things in our life that I know, like this outlook, this idea, this approach, it's flawed. It's flawed. And you could plug it in anywhere. It could be in my parenting, it could be in my marriage, it could be in my business, it could be with my friends, it could be in my Yiddishkeit, whatever it is. I know that it's flawed. But I spent so many years embedded in this mindset and embedded in this ism, embedded in this ideology that I just feel like I can't navigate my way out of it. Why not? Change your mind. It's not that simple. Actually it is. Basra Kuflan Beis Beis. Shchimira could change his mind on a dime. No one can stop him. He's in charge of what he thinks, how he thinks, and where his property goes. Allah Chaskam will say, sometimes change is difficult, and sometimes change is as simple as deciding to flip the switch. I'm no longer taking this approach. I'm no longer viewing the world in this way. I'm no longer viewing myself in this way. I'm making the conscious decision to think differently, to decide differently, and to approach life differently. If the Shechimera could do it, I could do it as well. The Gemara says, however, what about the next case? Kasav v'zika lazeh, v'kasav v'zika lazeh. Okay, so here's where it becomes much more complicated. Let's say Shechimera decided on Sunday, I'm giving my property to Ruvain. And he wrote a document, and he gave Ruvain the document. Right? So now Ruvain had looked at Rashbam, Kasav v'zika lazeh, Kasav kol mechasav l'Ruvain, u'masar lo es hashtar l'ra'ayos zuchuso. So interesting, I will say. So in this case, writing it to Ruvain, and he gives the shtar to Ruvain. And then what happens? Monday he gets upset at Reuven or whatever, he changes his mind, and he writes a document and he gives a document to Shimon. So I say, now what's the problem over here? So Reuven has a document from Sunday that says he is the recipient of the Matnas Shemira's property. Shimon has a document on Monday that he is the recipient of the Shemira's property. What do we do in this case? So both says, right? So understand what everybody agrees with is if there's no document and all this is verbal, Shemira could change his mind as many times as he wants. The shaila now is if the gift was put in writing, i.e. a daitiki, and the intended recipient now is holding the document, does Shemira have the ability to change his mind or not? So the Gemara is machlokes. Rav Amar Rishon Kana. Rav says the first one, we'll call him Reuven, right? Reuven is the one who acquires the property. Shmuel says no, Sheni Kana. Shmuel says no. Shmuel says the second guy is the one ultimately again who has the ability to acquire. Now what's the pshat? So Rav Amar Rishon Kana Haru Kimat Nasbari. See, interestingly enough, Rav says it is the first person who acquires because Rav treats this transaction like a regular healthy person's gift. And therefore again, let's say just in an Ashkemira case, right? Imagine today I decide, I'm gifting my car to Reuven, and then I say, you know what, I don't want to do that. I want to gift it to Shimon. But you can't do that. Once you gifted it, it's gifted, it's done. So therefore Rav treats this transaction as a matnas bari. We'll see why that isn't just a little bit. And Shmuel, on the other hand, Shmuel says, Sheni kana harihi kimatna shchimira. And Shmuel says, ultimately, again, this is, the second person acquires it because he holds, it's like a matna shchimira. Both say, let's take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Rav Amar Rishon Kana, it's 4 lines up before the lines get wide. Tahazika kikinyan chashivle, vahari kimatna shchimira, shekasav bakinyan, the arkavei atrevich, tafilim amad in chozer. So interestingly enough, so Rav says, this is the same case as we had before. In other words, writing a document and handing it over to someone, Rav says, is the same thing as writing a kinyan. It's the same thing. In other words, you're utilizing an additional mechanism of conveyance. So therefore, again, what did Rav say before? Rav said earlier, Rav said a gift like this, the Shman the Shemir that has a kinyan in this case is a shtar, ultimately rides on 2 horses. It has the properties of a matnas bari and a matnas shemira. But because it has the properties of a matnas bari, a healthy person's gift, therefore the first guy acquires it, the second guy does not. Look at the Rashbam, Shmuel Amar Sheni Kana, Kedin matnas shemira b'chol nechasav she'in b'kinyan. Bim Amar Chozer, Shmuel says on the other hand, remember this is Shmuel the Shita, so Shmuel says, I don't know exactly what to do with it, right? But Lamaisa, Shmuel would default treat it as a matnas shchimira, and therefore again, Shimra has the ability to go ahead and give the shtar to the second guy, have the second guy acquire it. So says, I don't understand. So I say, so essentially what you're saying is, this is the same machlokes as we saw before. In other words, it's the same machlokes. How do we start today? We started today as a matnas shchimira, where there's a document that has a kinyan in it. Right? We have machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Essentially, we're treating this as the same case, right? Essentially, shchimira writing a document and giving it to a the recipient is the same thing as a matnas shchimira that has a kinyan written into it. And Rav and Shmuel both hold their respective opinions. So why do you have to restate another case that just espouses the same opinions again? I'll tell you why. Tzvicha. I'll tell you why we need them. Tzvicha. Di'i itmar baha. Because if it would have just said the first case of where the kinyan is written into the shtar, so Rav mishum dekanu minei, so Rav would have said in his case, ultimately again, this is like a matnas bari. Why? Because there was an actual kinyan that occurred. But in this case over here, second case, where there was no actual kinyan, there was a conveyance of a shtar, but there was no actual kinyan, maybe Rav will hold like Shmuel. The Idmar Baha, and if it would have just said the second case, Baha Kamer Shmuel, Rav. Maybe Shmuel only holds his particular position in case number 2, but in case number 1 he'd be moded to Rav because there was a kinyan. Therefore tzricha. Therefore ultimately again we need both cases. Fine. Besura masnuachi. So we'll say up until now the version that we saw was the version that they espoused in Surah. But Pumpadisa masnuachi and Pumpadisa they had a different version. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba shalchu mibei Rav l'Shmuel. So listen to this. So both say this is the same information, just different attributions. So in Pumpadisa they had the following version. This is what Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said. Shalchu lemi bei Rav Shmuel. So they sent from the yeshiva of Rav Shmuel. Yamdin Rabbeinu. Rabbi, teach us. Shchiv mira shekasav kol nechasav la'achirim v'kano miyado mahu. Okay. All right, this is interesting. So Rav says, now in this case over here, Shchiv mira wrote all of his property over to Ruvain. And then what happened? The Eidim did a kinyan sudar with the Shchiv mira. Right, so remember again, now you'll say to yourself, why the Eidim doing a kinyan sudar? Remember again, who are they doing the kinyan on whose behalf? On Ruvain, the intended recipient, right? Zachal Adam Shlo B'fanov. You can do something beneficial for someone even without their knowledge. So therefore, again, in this case over here, so Ruvain, so Shchiv mira is writing a document. Shekasu kol nechasav la'achirim. So he's writing his document to Ruvain. He's writing his document to Ruvain, and ultimately, again, the Eidim do a kinyan with him. So Mahu, what is the halacha? What is the halacha? And I both say now, what is the halacha? What they're asking over here is, interestingly enough, can Shchiv mira renege on the gift? Right? So again, Matna Shchiv mira. So again, I both say, let's take a step back. In general, could a Shchiv mira gives his property to someone? Could he renege? Absolutely. He could renege, decide he wants to take it back. He could assign it to anyone else. He could do whatever he wants. What's the wrinkle over here? What's the wrinkle? The kinyan. So now Shchiv mira did a kinyan, right? So he assigned his property to Ruvain, or doesn't matter, to Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, whatever it is, right? And now what he did a kinyan, can he renege on the transaction or not? So Shalchulu, so they sent back, Ein achar kinyan klum. No. Once there's a kinyan that's done, the Shchiv mira has created an irreversible reality. Once there's a kinyan, as they say, no backsies, right? That's it. Can't take it back. Top of Kufn and Gimel. So originally they thought, okay, what does it mean no backsies? That the Shchiv mira cannot go ahead and take the property back, cannot assign the property to someone else. Like that's what it means. Can't assign the property to someone else. But maybe if he wants, let's say Shmuel wants to take it back for himself. Okay, you're right. So I understand. So once Shchiv mira does a kinyan, right? So therefore, and he assigns it to Ruvain, he can't then decide to assign it to Shimon. Fine. But what if he wants to take it back for himself? He wants it for himself. I would have thought that should be okay. Amr lehu Rav Chisda. So first of all, take a look at Rashbam. Tap Rashbam of Kufnun Gimel Amud Aleph. Savar minei hanimili de'ein la'achar kinyan klum shim kasav azika l'rishon v'kasav azika la'achar d'rishon kana legamrei ukigon shemesh Shchiv mira avali atzmo yachal lachzer bo im ya'amo mechalyo lo kana rishon shelo haya kinyan elamachmas misa. So when do we say that halacha l'maisa if there's a kinyan that halacha l'maisa Shchiv mira can't renege? So that's only the matna Shchiv mira. But if Shchiv mira wants to go ahead and take the property back for himself, he should be able to do that. Amr Rav Chisda said Kufnun Gimel Adalef 153a, second line down. Amr Rav Chisda Kias Rafuna Mikofri Pirsha Bein Liatzmo Bein Liacherim. Fascinating. Once the Shchiv mira does a kinyan, it becomes an irreversible gift. It's irreversible in that he can't assign it to someone else, and it's irreversible that he can't take it back himself either. The Gemara tells a story. Hahu dekanu minei. So there's a story like this. A story like this that Rashbam says, "Kasa v'zika v'kanu minei v'raza lachsabal kisham mechalyo." So this is the case. Shchiv mira was on his deathbed. What did he do? He assigned his property to Ruvain. He went ahead and he did a kinyan. Did a kinyan with the Eidim. And then Abba said, then what happened? He recovered. So he wanted to cancel the transaction. So the Gemara says, Asu lekamei Rav Huna. So they came before Rav Huna because the Shchiv mira wanted to cancel the transaction. You know, Abba said, can you imagine this case? Right? Shchiv mira wrote in a document that he's gifting his property to Ruvain. And he also did a kinyan. Also did a kinyan sudar with the Eidim. And now Baruch Hashem, Shchiv mira recovers. So he goes over to Reuven and says, Reuven, I'm canceling this. So Reuven, can you imagine this? Reuven's like, so happy. So Baruch Hashem, Baruch Rofei Cholim, incredible. Tell me when the Kiddush is. I'm not giving you back your stuff. Right, but again, so happy, Baruch Hashem. So they come up for Rav Huna, Amar, Mai Avad Lecha, Delo Aknis Kidemaknu Inshi. What can I do for you? You did not follow the normal protocol. You did not follow the normal protocol of Shchiv mira. Well, I'll say, what's the normal protocol of Shchiv mira? I'm going to say, remember, This is the beauty of the framework of Shchimira. The beauty of framework of Shchimira is that it allows for retraction of the gift, or the cancellation of the gift. It's not even retraction, it's cancellation, should a person go out and recover. The problem is, once you start using mechanisms that are outside of normative Shchimira, Rav Huna says, what do you want from me? You made a kinyan. You didn't need to make a kinyan. That was the beauty of this. You didn't make a kinyan. You could make a mamash shchimira and just leave it alone. You complicated it. You did the kinyan. There's nothing I could do for you. The gift is irreversible. I'll say a tremendous musah on this also. Right? How sometimes in life, when we create difficult situations, sometimes we create difficult situations for ourselves, and then we go to other people hoping that they're going to be able to extract us from that situation. And I will say, sometimes you could get help, but sometimes when you make your own mess, no one else could help you clean it up but you. When you make certain bad decisions in life, the only way to back out of them is by yourself. It might be nice, it's always tempting to ask other people for help, but sometimes if you get yourself into it, you need to get yourself out of it. So we'll say, how do we paskin? So this is actually very interesting. So the Rambam writes over here as follows. So we'll say, so again, in this case over here, remember, in this case, so what's happening over here is just to illustrate the cases differently. In previous case, there was a kinyan written into the shtar. In this case over here, and in that it said Shchimira did a kinyan, with the intended recipient. So how do you view that matna Shchimira? So again, it depends. If the kinyan was there for transactional purposes, then the gift is void because we don't know, is this a matnas shchimira or is this a matnas bari? If it's a matnas bari, in other words, that he only wants it to happen through the shtar, in shtar la'achamisa, therefore the transaction is void. If the kinyan was there to bolster and to solidify the ownership of the recipient, then it's a matnas shchimira and it's fine. This case is different. In this case over here, shchimira is assigning property to Ruvain, and shchimira is doing a kinyan right now with the Eidim. So the shaila is, what is the status of this gift? So the Rambam writes, Shchimra shekasav lezev v'chazav v'kasav la'acharon v'chazav la'achar acharon kana sheyesh lo lachzor ad shiyamos. So first of all, there's a halacha that we saw that a Shchimra could change his mind as many times as he wants. Right? In other words, he assigns it to Reuven, he assigns it to Shimon, back to Reuven. He could do whatever he wants, whether this is in writing, whether this is verbally. However, he writes, "Va'afilu kasav v'zikah l'rishon kasav v'zikah l'achron kana sheshchimra shezika adayin matna shchimrahi." But interestingly enough, the way the Rambam Paskins is like this, and it's a little bit different than the Gemara. If Shchimira goes ahead, and even so, whether he verbally assigns it to Ruvain, he could change his mind and assign it to Shimon. Even if he wrote it down, he could change his mind. Even if he wrote it down and gave the document to the intended recipient, he could still change his mind. Right? As long as what's the key thing over here? As long as there's no kinyanim. So as long as all we're doing over here is verbal declaration or even something in writing, but no kinyanim, Shchimira could change his mind as many times as he wants. Here's the problem. Aval, Shchimira, Shekasa v'zika v'kana miyado, ein la'achar kinyan klum. I will say, but here we go. Once the Shchimira goes ahead and does a kinyan. So again, Shchimira assigns the property to Ruvain and does a kinyan with Eidim, then there's no backsies. Then that gift cannot revert. You can't, he goes on, he says, Shimra cannot claim it back for himself or for others. Now why not? Listen to what the Maggid Mishnah says. The Maggid Mishnah says, here it is. Hakinyan hofech es hamatana lemuchletes. What the kinyan does is, the kinyan essentially makes this gift into what he calls a matana muchletes. An absolute, thank you, an absolute gift. Shahav asal matanaso chizuk kafel. Because remember again, you gave this matana, what he calls a chizuk kafel, like a double strength matana. In what sense? Number one, ziko aide achar v'kinyan suda de atzmo. Because again, remember, you went ahead and you gave a shtar or you gave a verbal declaration plus a kinyan. Bevadai niskavein shetacha lamatana miyad kimat nasbari. So fascinatingly enough, Shchimira could always go ahead and change his mind. Whether he's verbally assigning the gift, writing the gift, he could always change his mind a million times and take it back for himself. Once he does a kinyan, that kinyan, and again, remember the kinyan he's doing with the eidim on behalf of the intended recipient, that that kinyan solidifies the matana, makes it into that matana muchletes, and he cannot get it back. He can't assign it to someone else, nor can he take it back for himself. Rabbi said tremendous. Why? All why? Because he messed with the system. So in other words, the system is there to protect it's the beauty, to protect the interest of the shchimera. That's the beauty of it. It's structured that way because again, the system also understands that there's a possibility of his recovery, that there's a possibility of his wanting to assign stuff. So the system works. The system always works. Just don't tamper with it. But the moment you decide to go ahead and tamper with it, that transforms the transaction into something else. And again, in the words of the Maggid Mishnah, it becomes ultimately, again, this Matan Mochlet. So we'll say, Shkoyach, we'll stop over here today. What a start to the week.
So if the Sheba is just not aware